For 15 years, my daughter called me every Saturday at exactly 9 in the morning. She never missed it. Not once. Not during hurricanes. Not after surgeries. Not even the morning her husband lost his temper so badly the neighbors called the police. Last Saturday, the phone did not ring. By the 10th day of silence, I broke into her house. In the back of her reading closet, I found my granddaughter clutching a pocket watch, counting the hours since her mother disappeared. I am truly thankful you are here with me in this moment. Your presence matters more than you realize. Before we go any further, I would love to know where you are listening from today. Share your city or country in the comments below. It always amazes me to see how far these stories travel. And if you are comfortable, tell me something personal. How old are you? I genuinely care about knowing who is on the other side of these stories. One gentle reminder. Some elements of this story have been shaped for reflection and storytelling purposes. Any resemblance to real people or places is purely coincidental. But the heart of the message, the truth behind it, is very real. And I hope it stays with you long after this ends. Every Saturday, at exactly 9 in the morning, my daughter called me. For 15 years, that phone rang like it was connected to the pulse of my entire world. It did not matter if tropical storms were crawling up the Georgia coastline, or if she had spent the whole night reading to her daughter because neither of them could sleep. At 9 on the dot, the old telephone on my workshop wall would ring, and I would hear her voice, and the week would make sense again. My name is Arthur Calloway. I am 70 years old, a retired watchmaker, living in a quiet corner of Savannah, Georgia, where the live oaks drip Spanish moss, like time itself, has slowed down and decided to stay a while. For 45 years, I repaired timepieces, grandfather clocks, wristwatches, mantle clocks, pocket watches, the kind of delicate machinery most people throw away when it stops working. I never threw anything away. I listened. Every tick tells a story. Every silence tells a bigger one. My workshop sits in the back of my garage, a narrow room lined with wooden shelves holding hundreds of clocks in various states of repair. Some tick steadily, some sit open, their gears exposed, waiting for me to find what went wrong. The air in that room always smells faintly of brass polish and machine oil. And the sound, that layered chorus of ticking from dozens of mechanisms all running at slightly different speeds, that sound has been the background music of my life for nearly half a century. Retirement was supposed to be quieter. And for the most part, it was. I tended to the roses in the front garden. I walked to the corner bakery on Wednesday mornings for a cinnamon roll and a cup of coffee. I played chess with my neighbor Leonard on his porch every other Thursday. But Saturdays had a rhythm that mattered more than any of that. I would wake early, the way old men do, before the light even touched the tops of the oaks. I would go to my workshop, wind the clocks that needed winding, oil the ones that had been sitting too long. Then I would brew a pot of Earl Grey, pour it into the chipped blue mug my daughter gave me for my 60th birthday, and sit in the old leather chair beside the phone on the wall. At 8:58, I would glance at the clock above the doorframe. At 9, it would ring, and on the other end would be Ruth. "Hey, Dad," she would say, and I could hear the warmth in her voice before I even pictured her face. The same warmth she had at 10 years old when she used to sit on a wooden stool in this very workshop, legs swinging because they could not reach the floor, watching me take apart a broken pocket watch with the kind of concentration most children reserve for cartoons. "Daddy, why does this one tick and that one does not?" she had asked once, pointing at 2 watches on my workbench. One was running. The other had been sitting silent for weeks. "Because someone stopped winding it, sweetheart," I told her. "Every clock needs someone who cares enough to keep it going. You stop paying attention, and it goes quiet. But that does not mean it is broken forever. It just means it is waiting for someone to start it again." She had nodded, like that was the most important thing anyone had ever told her. Maybe it was. She carried that idea with her into everything she did. Ruth did not become a watchmaker like me. She became a librarian. Said she wanted to take care of stories the way I took care of clocks. Preserve them. Keep them ticking. I could not argue with that. My daughter had a reverence for things that endured, for words on pages that outlived their authors, for timepieces that outlived their makers. She understood that some things are meant to last longer than the people who created them. Our Saturday calls usually lasted about an hour, sometimes longer if neither of us had anywhere to be, which was most weeks. She would tell me about her work at the Savannah Public Library before she moved, and then after, about the branch in Charleston where she had transferred. She would talk about the children who came for story hour, about the old regulars who sat in the reading room every afternoon just for the company. She would mention Dean, her husband, though less and less as the years went on, and then Ellie would grab the phone. My granddaughter, 9 years old, sharp as a jeweler's loop, curious about everything. "Grandpa, when am I coming to visit?" she would ask. Her voice bright and quick. "This weekend, sweetheart?" If your mama says it is okay. Most weekends she did visit. She would sit on that same wooden stool in my workshop, legs still not quite reaching the floor, asking questions while I worked. Same furrowed brow as her mother. Same stubborn need to understand how things worked. Those Saturday calls were not just routine. They were the mechanism that kept my week turning. 9 in the morning, every Saturday, without fail, until last Saturday. I was in my workshop, the Earl Grey steaming in the blue mug, the clocks ticking their layered symphony around me. 8:58. I glanced at the clock above the door. 2 minutes. The phone hung silent on the wall. 9 o'clock came. Then 9:01. 9:05. I set the mug down. 9:10. I stood and lifted the receiver. Dial tone, clear and steady. Nothing wrong with the line. I dialed her number. I did not need to look it up. I had memorized it the day she moved to Charleston, 8 years ago. It rang 4 times. Then voicemail. "Hi, you have reached Ruth. I cannot come to the phone right now, but leave me a message, and I will call you back as soon as I can." Her voice sounded normal, bright, familiar, like the steady tick of a healthy mechanism. But the mechanism had not called me, and in 45 years of fixing timepieces, I had learned one unshakable truth. Clocks do not stop without a reason. That night, I sat in my workshop long after the sun dipped behind the oaks. The clocks ticked around me, dozens of them, each one marking time in its own rhythm. Normally, that sound comforted me. But that evening, surrounded by all those faithful mechanisms, the one silence I could not fix was the only one that mattered. I called Ruth again at 10. Voicemail. At 11. Voicemail. By midnight, I had called 6 times. Each time, her recorded voice greeted me, bright and familiar, and completely useless. I set the phone down on the workbench and pressed my palms against my eyes. 45 years of fixing broken things, and I could not even reach my own daughter. Sunday and Monday lurched past like a clock with a damaged escapement, uneven, stuttering. I tried to hold my routine, watered the roses, brewed tea, sat on the porch watching the street as if Ruth might pull into the driveway and wave. She did not. I called twice more each day. Voicemail, every time. I remembered Ruth at 22, fresh out of her library science program. We had sat on the porch of her first apartment in Athens, drinking sweet tea while cicadas screamed in the trees. "I want to take care of stories the way you take care of clocks, Dad," she had told me. "Preserve them. Keep them alive. Because stories are like timepieces. They measure something invisible, but you feel it when they stop." She had never stopped calling. Not during ice storms. Not with food poisoning. Not even the Saturday morning after Dean had come home drunk and put his fist through the hallway mirror, and Ruth had phoned me with glass still in her hair. "I am fine, Dad. It was an accident." I had driven 3 hours that same day, jaw clenched the entire way. By the time I arrived, the mirror was replaced. Dean greeted me with a handshake and a story about losing his balance. Ruth stood behind him, calm, a thin scratch on her forearm she blamed on cleaning up the glass. I had let it go. God help me. I had let it go. By Tuesday, I could not wait any longer. I called the Charleston Library branch where Ruth worked. The manager, Diane, answered with clipped efficiency. Ruth called in last Monday, she said. Family emergency. We have not heard from her since. Family emergency. There had been no emergency in my family. I would have known. I dialed Dean next. He answered on the third ring. Arthur, he said smoothly. Hey, everything all right? Too smooth. Not worried. Not confused. Just polished, like a clock face without a scratch. The kind that looks perfect because someone has been very careful about what they let you see. I cannot reach Ruth, I said carefully. Her phone goes straight to voicemail. The library says she has been out since Monday. What is going on? A pause. Maybe 2 seconds. But I have spent a lifetime listening for the gaps between ticks, the micro-silences that reveal where a mechanism is failing. 2 seconds was enough. Oh yeah, he said. And his voice shifted into something rehearsed. I should have called you. Ruth took Ellie on a little trip, visiting an old college friend up in Virginia. She just needed to disconnect. You know how she gets. Emotional, overwhelmed. My daughter was the least overwhelmed person I had ever known. She had once reorganized the entire children's section of the library during a flood evacuation without raising her voice. Where in Virginia? Just outside Richmond. Nothing fancy. Mother-daughter time. Put Ellie on the phone. They are out right now. Exploring. I will have Ruth call you. When they get back. When is that? Few days. Maybe the weekend. I let the silence stretch the way I do when testing a mechanism, waiting for the click that reveals the fault. Dean filled it himself. Really, Arthur? Do not overthink this. She is fine. They both are. Then he hung up. Not abruptly. Just efficiently. Like closing a case designed to stay shut. I stood in the kitchen with the phone still pressed to my ear, listening to dead air. I called Helen Park next. Ruth's closest friend at the library. Sharp, warm, the kind of woman who noticed everything. Her daughter Emma and Ellie were inseparable. She answered on the second ring. Mr. Calloway? Is everything all right? Have you heard from Ruth? No, she said immediately. And the worry in her voice was genuine in a way Dean's had not been. I have been trying since Wednesday. Nothing. I drove by her house Thursday evening. Every light was off. Curtains closed. I knocked. Nobody answered. Her voice dropped. I am scared. Mr. Calloway, this is not like Ruth at all. No, I said quietly. It is not. After we hung up, I opened my laptop and checked Ruth's Facebook. Her last post was 3 weeks old. A photograph of Ellie holding up a watercolor painting at the library art show, grinning, paint smudged on her cheek. Ruth had captioned it, "My little artist. Proudest mama in the world." No travel posts, no check-ins, no signs of any trip to Virginia. I leaned back and stared at the ceiling. 3 people. 3 different stories about where my daughter was. The library said, family emergency. Dean said Virginia. Helen said the house was dark and silent. Then I remembered something that made my chest tighten. 3 weeks earlier, Ellie had stayed with me for a long weekend. We were in the workshop, and she was watching me replace the mainspring on a mantel clock. She had been unusually quiet, which was rare for a girl who asked more questions than most adults could answer. Then, out of nowhere, she had said something I dismissed completely. "Grandpa, what happens when a clock lies about the time?" I had smiled. "Clocks do not lie, sweetheart. They just break sometimes." She had looked at me with those dark eyes, so much like Ruth's, and said nothing. Just turned back to the clock and watched me work in silence. Now, sitting alone with every instinct screaming that something had gone terribly wrong, that question landed like a stone dropped into still water. Not a child's curiosity. A warning. A 9-year-old girl trying to tell me something she did not have the words for. What happens when a clock lies about the time? You stop trusting the face. You open the casing. And you look at what is really happening inside. The most dangerous clocks are the ones that look perfectly fine while their mechanisms are silently destroying themselves within. Dean Prescott was that kind of clock, and my daughter was trapped somewhere inside his broken machinery. I left Savannah before the first light touched the live oaks. The overnight bag sat on the passenger seat beside a thermos of Earl Grey that had already gone cold. My blood pressure medication was in the side pocket. My phone charger was coiled next to it, and tucked beneath the bag, out of habit I could not explain, was my small leather toolkit, the one I had carried to every repair job for 45 years. Watchmaker's screwdrivers, tweezers, a loop, a spring bar tool. I told myself it was routine. But routine does not make your hands tremble on the steering wheel at 5:30 in the morning. The highway stretched north through the coastal lowlands, flat and gray in the pre-dawn haze. Fog clung to the marshes on either side of the road, thick and low, turning the landscape into something half-erased. The truck hummed steady beneath me. The radio stayed off. The only sound was the engine and my own breathing, shallow and tight. Like a mainspring wound, one turn too many. I had driven this route dozens of times. 3 hours on, I-95, from Savannah to Charleston. I knew every exit, every rest stop, every stretch where the speed limit dropped through small towns with gas stations and Baptist churches. I had driven it for birthdays, for Thanksgivings, for the time Ellie had the flu and Ruth needed an extra pair of hands. I had driven it the day Dean punched the mirror, my knuckles white on the wheel the entire way. I had never minded the distance. I liked being needed. Liked knowing that when something broke in my daughter's world, I was the one she called to fix it. But that morning, the road felt longer than it ever had. My mind drifted the way it does on long drives when you are too tired to focus and too afraid to sleep. I saw Ruth at 10 years old, standing on tiptoes in my workshop, peering into the open back of a grandfather clock. The brass gears gleamed under the work lamp. She had reached out one small finger and touched the escapement wheel, then pulled back quickly when it clicked. "Daddy, how do you know which part is broken just by listening?" "You learn to hear what is missing, sweetheart," I had told her. "Every mechanism has a sound it is supposed to make. When something changes, even a little, that is where you look." She had nodded, serious as a surgeon, and gone back to watching. That was Ruth. She did not just ask questions. She absorbed answers, carried them, used them years later, in ways I never expected. The memory shifted. Ruth at 25, the day she married Dean Prescott in a small church outside Charleston. October afternoon, the kind where the light comes through stained glass and turns everything golden. She had held my arm as we walked down the aisle, and I had felt her fingers tighten slightly. Not from doubt, I had told myself. Just nerves. Dean stood at the altar in a rented charcoal suit. Tall, clean-shaven, posture straight as a pendulum at rest. He smiled when he saw her. Confident. Polished. When I shook his hand afterward, his grip was firm, almost too firm, like a clock wound too tight. Too much tension in the spring. I had felt it then, a subtle resistance, something not quite calibrated. I had mentioned it to Ruth the week before. Something about him, I had said, struggling to articulate what 45 years of mechanical instinct was telling me. I do not know. Something feels off. She had looked at me with patience and a little sadness. "Dad, I love him. Is that not enough? What kind of father keeps pushing after that?" So, I had swallowed it. Smiled for pictures. Told myself I was being overprotective. an old watchmaker seeing faults in mechanisms that worked perfectly fine. Now, with the highway unspooling ahead of me and the fog slowly lifting off the marshes, I wondered whether I had confused instinct with interference. Whether the fault I had sensed 12 years ago had been there all along, ticking quietly beneath a polished surface, waiting for the moment it would finally break. 2 months earlier, Ellie had stayed with me for a weekend. Saturday afternoon, we were in the workshop. She was sitting on the wooden stool, watching me regulate a stubborn pocket watch that kept losing 3 minutes a day. She had been quiet for a long stretch, which was unlike her. And then she had said something offhand. "Daddy gets angry about numbers, Grandpa." I had looked up. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" She had shrugged. "The way children do when they sense they have said too much. He yells at Mama about numbers on his computer. Mama closes the door, so I cannot hear. But I hear anyway." I had let it pass. Children misunderstand adult conversations. That is what I told myself. Now, gripping the wheel, I wished I had asked the next question. "What numbers, sweetheart? What is he yelling about?" Then there was the memory that burned hottest. 3 months before this morning, during our Saturday call, Ruth had been quieter than usual. Long pauses between sentences. The kind of pauses where someone is choosing very carefully what to say and what to leave unsaid. Near the end of the call, she had asked something that I had laughed off like a fool. "Dad, if something ever happened to me, you would take care of Ellie, right?" "Of course I would," I had said. "But nothing is going to happen to you, sweetheart. You are 37 years old and healthy as a horse." She had been quiet for a moment. Then, very softly, "Just promise me." "I promise. Now stop being morbid and tell me what Ellie built in school this week." She had changed the subject. So had I. And I had not thought about that conversation again until this morning, when it landed in my chest like a gear stripped of its teeth, grinding against everything around it. I should have asked what she meant. I should have heard what was missing in her voice. The way I hear what is missing in a broken mechanism. Instead, I had laughed and moved on, like a watchmaker who hears a gear grinding but decides to check it tomorrow. Tomorrow had run out, and I was still 3 hours away from the truth. I picked up my phone from the cup holder and dialed Dean. 4 rings. Voicemail. "This is Dean Prescott. Leave a message." "Dean," I said, forcing the shake from my voice. "I am on my way to Charleston. If Ruth and Ellie are home, have her call me immediately. If they are on this trip you mentioned, I want proof. A photo. A video call. Something. I will be there before noon." I tossed the phone back down and pressed the accelerator. The marshes gave way to pine forests. The fog thinned. Somewhere ahead, my daughter's house sat in silence. And I did not yet know that while I had been debating whether to leave, my granddaughter had already been alone for 10 days, and my daughter had already stopped calling. The house on Magnolia Lane did not look abandoned. It looked like it was holding its breath. I pulled onto the street just before 9 in the morning, the truck rolling slowly past identical mailboxes and trimmed hedges. Number 23 sat on the left side. A white colonial with black shutters and a wide front porch where Ruth used to sit on summer evenings reading while Ellie drew on the steps with sidewalk chalk. I had helped build the porch swing myself the first Thanksgiving after they moved in, spent an entire afternoon getting the chains level. While Dean watched from the doorway, holding a beer he never offered to share. The driveway was empty. No car. The curtains were drawn across every window, tight and deliberate, like eyelids pressed shut. The lawn had grown slightly uneven, not overgrown, but untended in a way Ruth would never have allowed. She kept the front garden meticulous. Azaleas along the walkway, jasmine climbing the porch rail, a small herb garden near the side gate. Now the jasmine had started to brown at the tips. The azaleas drooped. The herbs looked thirsty. Ruth did not let things wilt. That was the first sign. The mailbox was packed full. Envelopes pressed against each other. Some bent, some starting to yellow at the edges. On the porch steps sat a cardboard package, its corners swollen and soft from morning dew. I bent to check the shipping label. Delivered 8 days ago. 8 days sitting untouched on the steps. I straightened and knocked. 3 firm raps that echoed louder than they should have in the quiet street. Nothing. I knocked again, harder. My knuckles stung against the wood. "Ruth!" I called out. "Ellie!" "It is Grandpa." My voice bounced back at me, hollow and strange. Somewhere down the block, a dog began barking. A sprinkler hissed to life 2 houses over. Normal sounds surrounding an abnormal house. I pressed my ear against the door. No footsteps. No television. No movement. Just a faint mechanical hum from somewhere inside. A refrigerator compressor. Cycling on. Then I remembered. 2 summers ago, Ruth had locked herself out while watering the front garden. She had called me laughing, asking if I knew any tricks. I had driven up and failed miserably with a credit card, which made her laugh harder. That evening, she had shown me her solution. Around the back of the house, mounted on the wall beside the kitchen window, hung a small decorative cuckoo clock. A cheap one, not a real Black Forest piece. Just a painted wooden bird behind a tiny door. Ruth had bought it at a flea market and hung it there, because it made her smile every time she took out the trash. "Our little secret, Daddy," she had said, opening the clock's back panel. Time always opens the door. Inside, tucked behind the battery compartment, was a spare key. I walked around the side of the house, my boots crunching on the gravel path. The backyard was still. The patio furniture had not been moved. A glass sat on the outdoor table, half full of rainwater and something dark that had once been iced tea. I found the cuckoo clock right where it had always been, its paint fading in the coastal humidity. I reached behind it, felt for the panel, and twisted it open. The key dropped into my palm. It was cold, smaller than I expected, the weight of something that was about to change everything. I walked back to the front door and slid the key into the lock. For one breath, I stopped. Once I opened this door, whatever waited inside would become real. There would be no more hoping she was in Virginia. No more telling myself the phones were dead. No more believing Dean's polished explanations. Whatever truth lived behind this door was waiting. And it had been waiting for 10 days. The deadbolt turned. I pushed the door open. The air that met me was stale. Not rotten, not metallic, just closed. The kind of air that settles when windows have stayed shut and no one has walked through a room in days. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. The living room looked almost normal. Almost. But 45 years of finding hidden faults in beautiful mechanisms had trained my eye to see what most people missed. The coffee table was slightly crooked, its edge no longer aligned with the rug beneath it. The couch cushions were arranged too perfectly, symmetrical in a way that looked staged rather than lived in. A throw pillow lay on the floor behind the armchair, half hidden, as if it had been knocked off and no one had bothered to pick it up. Or someone had straightened everything else and missed that one detail. Then I saw the wall clock. It hung above the mantelpiece where it had always hung. The beautiful walnut case, the ivory face with Roman numerals, the delicate brass hands I had calibrated myself. I had given it to Ruth on her wedding day. A handmade piece, one of my finest, with an 8-day power reserve that I had engineered specifically so she would only need to wind it once a week. Every Sunday morning before calling me, Ruth wound that clock. It was part of our rhythm, part of the mechanism that connected us across 3 hours of highway. The hands had stopped at 11:47. The pendulum hung motionless behind the glass door. Silent. My chest seized. Ruth would never let this clock die. She wound it every Sunday morning without fail. The same way she called me every Saturday, without fail. If this clock had stopped, it meant Ruth had not wound it. And if Ruth had not wound it, it meant she could not. I moved deeper into the house, each step heavier than the last. The hallway smelled faintly of fresh paint. I ran my fingers along the wall. New paint. Recently applied. slightly tacky in one spot near the baseboard. Why would someone repaint a hallway wall? Family photographs on the mantel showed Ruth at graduation, Ellie missing her front teeth, Christmas mornings. 2 frames were tilted at odd angles. The kitchen gleamed. Countertops wiped spotless. Sink polished. Stovetop scrubbed clean of even the smallest splatter. Too clean. I opened the refrigerator. Beer bottles. Takeout containers stacked carelessly. A gallon of milk expired 6 days ago. No juice boxes. No yogurt. No apple slices in plastic bags. Nothing a 9-year-old would reach for. I shut the fridge slowly. My hands were shaking. A damp dish towel hung from the oven handle. Recently used. Someone had been in this kitchen. Someone who drank beer and ordered takeout and did not buy groceries for a child. And then I heard it. A sound so faint I thought at first I had imagined it. Not a scratch. Not a knock. Something smaller. More precise. Tick. 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 Soft. Fragile. Rhythmic. Coming from upstairs. Every clock in my workshop had a voice I could recognize. This one was not a wall clock or a mantelpiece. It was smaller. Thinner. The unmistakable sound of a pocket watch. And it was coming from my daughter's reading room on the 2nd floor. My heart slammed against my ribs. I moved toward the staircase. I took the stairs 2 at a time, following the sound the way I had followed the tick of a failing mechanism my entire life. When something calls to you from inside a broken machine, you do not hesitate. You do not second guess. You move toward it, because that tick is telling you where the damage is, and silence means you are already too late. The 2nd floor hallway was dim. The curtains at the far window were drawn, letting in only a thin blade of gray light that cut across the carpet. 3 doors lined the hall. The bathroom, closed. Ellie's bedroom, closed. And at the far end, Ruth's reading room. The door slightly ajar. Tick. 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 Closer now. Clearer. A small, precise sound, delicate as a heartbeat heard through a stethoscope. I knew that sound. I had heard it thousands of times across 45 years of work. It was a pocket watch, not a wall clock, not a mantelpiece. A pocket watch, the kind with a mechanical movement that needs to be wound by hand every 36 to 40 hours, depending on the mainspring. I pushed the reading room door open. The hinges whispered. Inside, everything looked the way it always had. Bookshelves lined 3 walls, floor to ceiling, packed with novels, poetry collections, children's picture books, organized by spine color, the way Ruth liked. Her reading chair sat beside the window. A knitted blanket draped over the arm. A mug rested on the side table, its contents long since evaporated to a dark ring at the bottom. The room smelled of old paper and dust and something faintly sour underneath, like unwashed cloth left in a closed space too long. The ticking came from the walk-in closet at the back of the room. Ruth had converted it years ago into a reading nook for Ellie, a small, cozy space lined with lower shelves, stuffed with picture books and chapter books and a beanbag chair shaped like a caterpillar. A place where a child could disappear into a story and forget the world outside. I crossed the room in 3 steps. My hand found the closet handle. For one fraction of a second, every clock in the universe seemed to pause. I pulled the door open. The closet was darker than the room behind me. The overhead bulb had burned out or been switched off. Light from the reading room spilled in at an angle, illuminating the lower shelves, the scattered books. The beanbag pushed to one side, and there, in the far corner, tucked behind a stack of oversized picture books, curled into herself so tightly she looked like something folded, rather than something alive, was Ellie, my granddaughter. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, except for a burning flush across both cheeks that told me her fever was dangerously high. Her lips were cracked and split in 2 places, dry blood dark at the corners. Her hair hung in tangled knots around her face. Her eyes were half open, glassy, unfocused, staring at nothing. And pressed against her chest, clutched in both hands like a sacred object, was the pocket watch I had given her for her 9th birthday 4 months ago. A small silver piece with a white enamel face and a mechanical movement I had restored myself. I had engraved the back, for Ellie. Time is love made visible. Grandpa. The watch was ticking. Steady. Faithful. Still running after 10 days because a 9-year-old girl had wound it every single morning in the dark. Grandpa. Her voice was barely a sound. Dry. Brittle. Like paper tearing slowly. But her eyes shifted. Found me. And something in them changed. Recognition. Not just recognition. Relief so enormous it seemed to collapse her from the inside out. 10 days, she whispered. 14 hours. And 22 minutes. That is how long I waited. She swallowed. And I could hear how much it cost her. Mama said you would come before the watch stopped. I dropped to my knees so hard the impact sent a shock through both legs. I did not feel it. I reached for her, and when I lifted her, she weighed almost nothing. Hollow. Fragile. Like a clock, casing stripped of every gear, every spring, every piece of machinery that once made it whole. Just the shell remained. But inside that shell, pressed against my chest, the pocket watch ticked between us like a shared pulse, hers and mine, beating together. Her skin burned through my shirt. Her small fingers dug weakly into the fabric at my shoulder, gripping with whatever strength she had left, which was almost none. I could feel each of her ribs through her pajama top. She had been wearing the same clothes for 10 days. I have got you, I said. My voice cracked on the second word. I have got you now, sweetheart. I shifted her weight to one arm and pulled my phone from my pocket. My fingers were shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. 9. 1. 1. The digits blurred, but I pressed them. 911. What is your emergency? I need an ambulance, I said, and I fought to keep my voice functional. 23 Magnolia Lane, Charleston. My granddaughter, 9 years old. Severe dehydration. High fever. She has been alone for at least 10 days. Please hurry. The dispatcher asked questions. I answered on autopilot. Is she breathing? Yes. Is she conscious? Barely. Any visible injuries? No. Just fever. Just dehydration. Just 10 days of a child surviving alone in a closet because her mother had taught her how. I held Ellie while I spoke, feeling every fragile breath against my neck. Her fingers loosened, then tightened again, as if she was afraid I might disappear the way her mother had. How long? I whispered into her hair once I ended the call. How long have you been in here, baby? She blinked slowly. Since the night Mama stopped talking. When was that? She was quiet for a moment. I could feel her trying to think, trying to pull a coherent answer from a mind clouded by fever and exhaustion and 10 days of darkness. The first night, she murmured. The Saturday night. I was reading in bed. Then I heard them yelling. Daddy. And a woman. At Mama. I did what Mama taught me. I went to the closet and closed the door. Her voice faded to almost nothing. Then came back, thin as a wire. Grandpa. I heard Mama crying. She was asking them to stop. She kept saying, please. And then she stopped. Everything stopped. Like when a clock runs down and there is nothing left. The words cut through me so cleanly I did not feel the wound at first. It came a second later, spreading from my chest outward. A cold, enormous thing that filled every space inside me. Sirens. Faint at first, then growing, winding up the street toward us. I held my granddaughter tighter, feeling the pocket watch tick between our bodies, marking the seconds of a world that had changed completely. She had waited 10 days, 14 hours, and 22 minutes. She had survived because Ruth had taught her how to hide, how to ration, how to wait, how to count. And as the paramedics came through the front door and their voices filled the house, I understood one terrible truth with absolute clarity. Whatever had silenced Ruth, whatever had stopped that wall clock at 11:47 on a Saturday night, had been building for a very long time. And my daughter, my brave, quiet, meticulous daughter, had seen it coming. She had not been able to stop it, but she had made sure her child would survive it. That was Ruth. That was always Ruth. Winding the clock one last time, even when she knew her own time was running out. The ambulance ride to MUSC Children's Hospital took 14 minutes. I know because I counted. When you have spent your entire life measuring time, you cannot stop, even when every second feels like it is tearing something out of you. Ellie drifted in and out of consciousness on the gurney, her small hand gripping mine with a strength that surprised me, given how little of her seemed to be left. The paramedic adjusted the oxygen mask over her face, checked her pulse, murmured numbers to his partner that I did not fully understand but knew were not good. Severe dehydration, he said to the driver. Malnutrition. This child has been without adequate food or water for days. I did not correct him. I did not say it had been 10 days. I just held my granddaughter's hand and watched her chest rise and fall, each breath shallow but real. Each one a small defiance against everything that had tried to take her from me. The emergency room was controlled chaos. Doctors surrounded Ellie the moment we arrived, their movements precise and urgent. They transferred her to a hospital bed, inserted IV lines, called out numbers and abbreviations. Someone tried to guide me back toward the hallway. "Sir, we need room to work." "I am not leaving her," I said. A young doctor with dark eyes and a steady voice looked at me for a moment, then nodded. "Stay by the wall. Do not get in the way." I pressed myself into the corner and watched them work. Blood pressure, temperature, blood draws. The IV bags went up one after another, clear fluid dripping into the tubing at a steady rhythm that reminded me, absurdly, of a clock's escapement. Tick, drip, tick, drip. The numbers on the monitors gradually improved. The tension in the room slowly eased. After what felt like hours but was probably 40 minutes, they moved Ellie to a private room on the pediatric floor. The IV continued its steady drip. Monitors beeped softly. Her fever had begun to come down. I pulled a chair close to her bed and sat, my body aching from the drive, from the fear, from holding myself together when everything inside me wanted to come apart like a clock dropped from a height. Ellie stirred. Her eyes opened slowly, and this time they were clearer, more focused. She looked at me, and I saw a real recognition for the first time since the closet. Not the glassy, faraway gaze of a child lost in fever. My granddaughter, looking at me, knowing me. "Grandpa," she whispered, "I am here, sweetheart." I squeezed her hand gently. "You are safe now." She was quiet for a moment, her gaze drifting to the pocket watch on the bedside table. They had let her keep it. It sat there ticking softly, faithful as ever, its silver case catching the fluorescent light. "Mama taught me," she said finally. Her voice was thin but steadier than before. "In case something bad happened." My throat tightened. "What did she teach you?" Ellie blinked slowly, gathering words like someone collecting pieces of a broken thing, trying to remember how they fit together. "Months ago, maybe since summer, Mama would come into my room at night after Daddy fell asleep. She would sit on my bed and tell me things. She said if I ever heard loud arguing, really loud, scary arguing, I should go straight to the reading closet and close the door. She said not to come out until you called my name, or the police." Every word was a blade. I sat very still and let them cut. "Mama showed me where she hid supplies," Ellie continued. "In the bottom drawer of the closet bookshelf, behind the big books I cannot reach. Crackers, granola bars, 3 water bottles. She said it was our secret emergency kit. She told me to eat just a little bit every day if I ever had to hide. Just enough to keep going." The image of Ruth carefully hiding food in her daughter's reading closet rationing supplies behind heavy books, planning for a catastrophe she prayed would never come, made something crack deep inside my chest. "What about water?" I asked. 3 bottles would not last 10 days. "At night," Ellie said. "When the house got really quiet and I could not hear anyone moving, I would open the closet door very slowly and go to the bathroom down the hall. I drank from the sink and filled up one of the empty bottles. Then I went back before it got light." She looked down at her hands. "I was so scared every time. But Mama said being brave means doing scary things when you have to." 9 years old. Sneaking through a dark house in the middle of the night to drink water from a bathroom sink. Then creeping back to a closet to hide. For 10 days. "The watch helped," Ellie added, reaching toward it on the bedside table. I touched it gently and slid it closer to her. She rested her fingers on the case without picking it up. "Mama gave it to me on my birthday. She said whenever I wound it, I should pretend she was holding my hand and counting with me. So every morning, when I woke up in the dark, I wound the watch and pretended Mama was there. Then I counted the hours until you came." I had to look away. I pressed my hand over my eyes and breathed through the tightness in my chest until I could speak again. "Why did you not try to leave?" I asked gently. "Or call for help?" Ellie's answer was simple and devastating. "Mama said to wait for you. She said you would come. She said you always come when something is broken. And if the Saturday phone did not ring, you would know something was wrong and you would drive up and find me. She told me to wait for you, Grandpa." Nobody else. The weight of that trust. Ruth's faith that I would notice the silence, that I would not accept Dean's lies, that I would drive 3 hours and break into her house and search until I found what was hidden. She had built her daughter's survival plan around me, around the certainty that a 70-year-old watchmaker would hear the one clock that had stopped ticking and come looking for the reason. "Mama also said something else," Ellie murmured, her eyes growing heavy again. "She said, if the worst happened, I should tell you to check Daddy's laptop. She said there are numbers in there that will explain everything." Numbers. Daddy gets angry about numbers. The words echoed back from 3 weeks ago in my workshop, from a little girl sitting on a stool watching me work, trying to warn me in the only language she had. "How long had Mama been scared?" I asked, though I was not sure I wanted the answer. "Since summer," Ellie said softly. She cried at night when she thought I was sleeping. I could hear her through the wall. But in the morning, she always smiled and made pancakes and said everything was fine. Of course she did. That was Ruth, smiling through fractures, keeping the face perfect while the mechanism inside was breaking, winding everyone else's clocks while her own was running out. Ellie's eyes closed. The medication and the fluids were pulling her toward sleep. Her breathing deepened. Her fingers relaxed on the bedside table, still touching the pocket watch. A soft knock on the door made me look up. A woman stood in the doorway. Mid-40s, dark hair pulled back, sharp eyes that held both authority and warmth. She wore a badge on a lanyard around her neck. "Mr. Calloway," she said quietly. "I am Detective Maria Santos, Charleston Police Department. I need to ask you some questions about your daughter." I glanced at Ellie one more time, sleeping now, chest rising and falling, the pocket watch ticking beside her like a tiny guardian keeping time. I looked back at Santos and said the words I had been avoiding since I had walked into that silent house and seen the wall clock frozen at 11:47. "My daughter is dead." "Is she not?" "Dean did this to her. For 15 years I repaired clocks that belonged to strangers. I learned something most people never consider. Every clock has a rhythm, and every rhythm tells you whether the mechanism inside is honest or broken. Detective Maria Santos had a rhythm too. She spoke in measured beats, never rushing, never pausing too long. She was a clock I could trust. She sat in the plastic chair beside Ellie's hospital bed, a small notebook open on her knee. She did not record anything electronically. She wrote by hand, in neat block letters, and I respected that. There is something honest about a person who still commits words to paper. Mr. Calloway, she said, I need you to walk me through everything. From the first missed call to the moment you opened that closet door. So I did. I told her about the Saturday silence, about Dean's polished voice on the phone, the lie about Virginia, about Helen Park, confirming the dark house, about the stale air inside 23 Magnolia Lane, the fresh paint on the hallway wall, the stopped clock frozen at 11:47, and the ticking I followed upstairs. I told her about Ellie curled around the pocket watch, whispering the exact number of hours she had been alone. Santos wrote without interrupting. When I finished, she looked at me the way a jeweler examines a stone held up to light. You mentioned fresh paint on a hallway wall, she said. Which wall exactly? Left side, between the living room and the staircase. About 4 feet wide, maybe 5. The color was close but not identical. A shade too warm. She nodded and wrote something, then underlined it twice. And your granddaughter mentioned a laptop. Numbers on a laptop. Yes, Ruth told Ellie to tell me. Check Daddy's laptop. The numbers. Santos closed her notebook. Mr. Calloway, I am going to be direct with you, because you deserve that. We ran a preliminary check on Dean Prescott before I came here. He reported Ruth missing 4 days ago, said she left voluntarily after an argument, and took personal belongings. He made no mention of your granddaughter. The room seemed to shrink. 4 days ago. That meant Dean had waited 6 full days before filing anything. And when he did, he erased Ellie from the story entirely. He left a 9-year-old child locked in a closet and pretended she did not exist. He knew she was in there, I said. We cannot confirm that yet, Santos replied. But I can tell you that omitting a child from a missing persons report is not something we overlook. She stood and buttoned her jacket. I am requesting a search warrant for the house tonight. Forensics will process the hallway wall, the kitchen, and the master bedroom. I am also requesting access to any shared financial accounts and electronic devices registered to Dean or Ruth Prescott. How long will that take? Judge on call should have it signed by midnight. My team will enter the house before dawn. She paused at the door and turned back. One more thing. You said the clock on their kitchen wall stopped at 11:47. Do you know if that was morning or night? I thought about it. The curtains had been drawn. No lights were on. The milk expired 6 days ago, and the mail had piled for over a week. Night, I said. 11:47 at night. That clock had an 8-day power reserve. If it stopped on the day I found it, it ran out sometime that morning, which means it was last wound 8 days before. That puts the last winding on a Saturday. The Saturday Ruth stopped calling. Santos stared at me for a long moment. You think like a detective, Mr. Calloway. No, I said. I think like a watchmaker. I read what the hands are telling me. She left. I sat beside Ellie, who had fallen back into a shallow, restless sleep. The IV drip counted its drops like a metronome. I held her hand, careful not to disturb the tubes taped to her wrist. And I thought about what Santos had told me. Dean had waited 6 days. 6 days of knowing his wife was gone. 6 days of knowing his daughter was somewhere inside that house. And he had done nothing. He had gone to work. He had eaten takeout. He had slept in that bed. And he had painted a wall. People paint walls for 2 reasons. To make something beautiful, or to hide something ugly. Dean was not an artist. My phone buzzed. A text from Helen Park. Arthur, I drove past the house again tonight. Dean's car is not in the driveway. Garage is closed. Do you want me to check? I typed back. Do not go near that house. Police are involved now. Stay safe. I will call you tomorrow. Then a second message arrived, this time from a number I did not recognize. No name, no greeting, just 5 words. Stop asking questions, old man. I stared at the screen. The letters glowed in the dim hospital room, sharp and cold. Someone knew I was here. Someone knew I was asking. And someone wanted me to stop. I saved the message and placed the phone face down on the bedside table. Then I looked at Ellie's sleeping face, at the pocket watch resting on the blanket beside her pillow. Its second hand was still moving, steady, faithful. Whoever sent that message did not understand watchmakers. We do not stop when a mechanism resists. We apply more precision. We find the part that is jammed, and we remove it. I leaned back in the chair and closed my eyes. Tomorrow, Santos would enter that house with luminol and black lights and evidence bags. Tomorrow, the walls Dean had painted would tell their own story, and I would be ready to listen, because I had spent 50 years learning one truth about clocks. You can paint over the face. You can silence the chime. You can even stop the hands. But you cannot erase the hours that have already passed. Time remembers everything. And so would I. I did not sleep that night. I sat in the chair beside Ellie's bed and listened to the hospital breathe. Ventilation hummed through the ceiling. Monitors beeped in distant rooms. Nurses moved through the hallway in soft-soled shoes, their footsteps careful and rhythmic, like the ticking of a clock designed never to disturb. At 4:17 in the morning, my phone rang. Detective Santos. Mr. Calloway, the warrant came through at 1:45. My team entered the house at 3. I need to tell you what we found, before you hear it from anyone else. I stood and walked to the window. Charleston was still dark, the harbor invisible beyond a thin line of streetlights. I pressed the phone against my ear and said nothing. I just waited. The way you wait when you open a clock and already know the mainspring is shattered, but need to see it with your own eyes. The hallway wall you identified, Santos said. We stripped the fresh paint. Underneath, luminol revealed a significant blood pattern, spatter consistent with blunt force trauma. Approximately 4 feet from the floor, the pattern extends 18 inches across the original surface. I gripped the windowsill. We also found trace evidence in the grout lines of the kitchen floor. Someone cleaned it with industrial-grade bleach, but luminol still reacted. There are drag marks from the hallway into the kitchen, then toward the garage door. He moved her. I said, the evidence is consistent with that interpretation. We have collected samples for DNA confirmation, but given the context, I want to prepare you. You believe it is Ruth's blood. A pause. Santos measured her words, the way I measured tolerances in a watch movement. Precisely. Yes. I believe it is your daughter's blood. I closed my eyes. Somewhere behind me, Ellie shifted in her sleep and murmured something I could not hear. The pocket watch on her pillow ticked on, indifferent and faithful, marking seconds that no longer mattered to Ruth but mattered enormously to the child she had saved. What else? I asked. Because I knew there was more. There is always more when you start disassembling a broken mechanism. The master bedroom closet contained a laptop. Dell. Registered to Dean Prescott. It was powered off, but not wiped. My digital forensics team is imaging the hard drive now. We also recovered a file box in the garage containing financial documents, bank statements, loan agreements, and correspondence with an entity called MZ Capital Partners. MZ Capital Partners. I had never heard the name, but Ruth had told Ellie to check the numbers on Dean's laptop. She had known about the money. She had known, and it had cost her everything. One more item, Santos continued. In the garage, near the drain, we found a single earring. Small opal set in silver. Does that mean anything to you? My throat tightened. I had given Ruth those earrings on her 30th birthday. Opals, because she was born in October, and because she once told me that opals looked like tiny galaxies trapped in stone. She wore them constantly. She was wearing them in her last Facebook post. The photo of Ellie at the library art show. They are hers, I said. I gave them to her. Santos was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I am sorry, Mr. Calloway. We are treating this as a homicide investigation. Dean Prescott is now a person of interest. We have issued a be on lookout alert for his vehicle, a 2021 black Audi Q5, South Carolina plate, November Papa Romeo 7412. He has not been at his workplace since Thursday, and his cell phone last pinged a tower near Walterboro, south of Charleston, 2 days ago. He is running, I said. Or hiding. Either way, we will find him. I have also requested financial records from First Heritage Bank, where Dean is employed as a branch manager. If your granddaughter's information about the laptop and the numbers connects to what we found in that file box, we may be looking at more than one crime. She told me to rest. I told her I would try. We both knew I was lying. After she hung up, I returned to the chair beside Ellie. The room was still dark. The IV drip continued its patient count. I picked up the pocket watch from the pillow and held it in my palm. It was warm from Ellie's body heat, and its ticking felt like a second heartbeat pressed against my skin. I thought about the opal earring on the garage floor. Such a small thing. A stone no bigger than a teardrop, resting beside a drain where someone had tried to wash away evidence of murder. Dean had scrubbed the floors. He had painted the walls. He had filed a false report and erased his own daughter from the record. But he had missed the earring. That is the thing about clocks and crimes. You can dismantle the visible parts. You can remove the hands, silence the chime, strip the dial. But somewhere inside the mechanism, there is always one tiny component that refuses to disappear. A hairspring, a jewel bearing. An opal earring the size of a galaxy. Ruth had left traces everywhere. In the blood, the paint could not fully cover. In the drag marks, the bleach could not erase. In the laptop, she told Ellie to mention. In the emergency kit she had packed 3 months before the night everything stopped. My daughter had known she was in danger. She had prepared for the worst with the precision of someone who grew up watching a watchmaker work. She had set every gear in place so that when the mechanism finally broke, the evidence would survive even if she did not. I held the watch and listened to it tick. 5:23 in the morning. Dawn was coming. Somewhere south of Charleston, Dean Prescott was hiding in the dark, believing he had erased every trace. He was wrong. The clock was still running, and every second it counted was 1 second closer to the truth. Dean Prescott was arrested at 6:14 on a Tuesday morning, 11 days after I found Ellie in the closet. He was not in Walterboro. He was 40 miles further south, in a rented cabin outside Beaufort, registered under the name Michael Trent. He paid cash. He told the owner he was a wildlife photographer, working on a project about coastal birds. The owner later said Dean seemed polite, calm, and completely unremarkable. Detective Santos called me from the scene. He did not resist, she said. He was sitting on the porch drinking coffee when the team arrived. He saw 6 officers and 2 vehicles, set the mug down on the railing and said, "I was wondering when you would show up." No panic. No attempt to flee. He asked if he could finish his coffee. I was in the hospital cafeteria when the call came. Ellie had been moved from the ICU to a regular pediatric room 2 days earlier. Her fever had broken. She was eating solid food again, small portions, carefully, the way a clock starts turning after being overwound. Dr. Caroline Wynn said the physical recovery was progressing well, but she cautioned that the psychological wounds would take much longer to surface. He asked about Ellie. Santos added, "What did he say?" He said, "Is my daughter all right?" Those were his exact words. I set my coffee down. The cafeteria was nearly empty. A janitor pushed a mop across the tile in slow, even strokes. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like a mechanism running slightly out of alignment. He left her in a closet for 10 days. I said, "He does not get to ask about her. I understand your anger, Mr. Calloway. I want you to know that he has been transported to Charleston County Detention Center. He has been charged with murder in the 1st degree, criminal neglect of a minor, obstruction of justice, and filing a false police report. Bail hearing is scheduled for Thursday. Murder in the 1st degree." I repeated the words silently. They were heavy and precise, like the brass weights inside a grandfather clock. They carried the full force of gravity. "There is more," Santos said. When we searched the cabin, we found a burner phone, a duffel bag containing approximately $12,000 in cash, and a second laptop. The burner phone had only 3 contacts saved. One was labeled V, another was labeled MZ. The third had no name, just a number, with an Atlanta area code, V. I thought of the anonymous text I had received in the hospital. "Stop asking questions, old man." Someone connected to Dean had sent that message. Someone whose name began with V. "Who is V?" I asked. "We are working on that. The number is registered to a prepaid carrier, so it will take time. But I can tell you that the MZ contact matches a number associated with MZ Capital Partners, the entity we found documents for in Dean's garage. And the Atlanta number? Still unidentified. We are running it now." After we hung up, I sat in the cafeteria for a long time. The janitor had finished mopping and the floor gleamed under the lights, wet and reflective like the surface of a watch crystal. I thought about Dean sitting on that porch in Beaufort, drinking coffee, waiting. Not running anymore. Just waiting. There are clocks that stop because their springs break. And there are clocks that stop because someone deliberately lets them wind down. Dean had not panicked. He had not fled the country, or destroyed the laptops or burned the evidence. He had driven 40 miles south, rented a cabin under a false name, and sat still. That told me something important. He believed he was protected. He believed someone else would fix this for him. V. MZ Capital. The Atlanta number. Dean was not the only gear in this mechanism. I returned to Ellie's room. She was sitting up in bed, the pocket watch open in her lap. She had been studying the movement inside. The tiny wheels and springs, visible through the display, back I had installed on her 9th birthday. She looked up when I entered, and her eyes held a steadiness that made my chest ache. 9 years old, and she had already learned to read faces the way I read clock dials. "They caught him," she said. Not a question. "Yes." "How did you know?" "You walk different when something heavy happens. Your steps get slower, like you are carrying something." I sat on the edge of the bed. "He is in jail, Ellie. He cannot hurt anyone." She looked down at the watch. "Grandpa, who is the woman with the yellow hair?" My hands went still. "What woman?" "She came to the house sometimes, late at night." Mama pretended she did not know, but I could hear them talking downstairs. The woman laughed loud. She smelled like cigarettes and something sweet, like vanilla perfume. Mama called her that woman when she talked to Helen on the phone. Yellow hair, vanilla perfume, cigarettes. A woman who visited late at night when Ruth pretended not to notice. "Do you know her name?" I asked. Ellie shook her head. "But one time I heard Daddy call her Viv. He said it quiet, like it was a secret. V. The contact on Dean's burner phone. The person who might have sent me that threatening text. A woman who had been inside my daughter's home, laughing in the dark, while Ruth lay awake upstairs, listening. I looked at the pocket watch in Ellie's hands. The second hand moved in its small, certain circle. Every revolution brought us closer to understanding the full machinery of what had happened inside that house on Magnolia Lane. "Thank you, Ellie," I said. "You are braver than any clock I have ever built." She almost smiled. Almost. And then she said something that landed in my chest, like a hammer striking a bell. Mama said the woman was dangerous. She said Daddy loved the woman more than the numbers. More than the numbers. More than the money. Whatever Dean had done, he had not done it alone. And the woman with the yellow hair was not just a secret. She was the second hand on a clock, built for destruction. The laptop told the story Dean never intended anyone to read. Detective Santos called me on a Wednesday afternoon, 6 days after the arrest, and asked me to come to the Charleston Police Department. She said there were things I needed to see in person because some truths lose their weight over the phone. I left Ellie with Dr. Nguyen and a child life specialist named Margaret Okafor, a woman with calm hands and a voice that reminded me of the low hum of a tuning fork. Ellie trusted her. That was enough for me. At the station, Santos led me to a conference room where a man in a gray suit sat behind a table covered in printed spreadsheets, bank records, and a projected screen showing a web of colored lines connecting names and numbers. His name was Thomas Whitfield, forensic accountant with the South Carolina Attorney General's office. "Mr. Calloway," Whitfield said, adjusting his glasses, "I am going to walk you through what we found on your son-in-law's devices. I want to warn you, the scope of this is larger than a domestic crime." He clicked the first slide. A simple organizational chart appeared. At the top, First Heritage Bank, Charleston Branch. Below it, Dean Prescott, branch manager. And beneath Dean, a single line running to a box labeled MZ Capital Partners, LLC, registered in Delaware, incorporated 18 months ago. MZ Capital Partners is a shell company, Whitfield explained. It has no employees, no physical office, and no legitimate business activity. What it does have is a bank account at First Heritage, opened by Dean Prescott using his managerial authority. And over the past 14 months, approximately $2.3 million has been routed through that account. $2.3 million. I let the number settle. It was enormous and impossible. And yet, sitting in that room surrounded by evidence, it was as real as the ticking of a clock. "Where did the money come from?" I asked. "Client accounts," Whitfield said. Dean managed a portfolio of high-net-worth customers at the branch. He created a series of small, recurring transfers, typically between $800 and $3,000, from dormant or low-activity accounts into MZ Capital. The transactions were disguised as service fees, maintenance charges, and compliance adjustments. Each one was small enough to avoid automatic flagging. Santos opened a folder and placed a printed page in front of me. It was a list of 17 names. 17 clients whose accounts had been quietly drained over 14 months. "None of these clients filed complaints?" I said. "3 did," Santos replied. "They contacted the bank's customer service line. In each case, Dean personally handled the inquiry and reversed the charge, calling it a system error. The clients were satisfied." The pattern continued. Whitfield clicked to the next slide. The money trail. MZ Capital received the funds, then distributed them to 3 destinations. The first was a personal brokerage account in Dean's name, total deposits of $480,000. The second was a series of cash withdrawals from ATMs across South Carolina and Georgia, total of $210,000. The third, and largest, was a wire transfer to an account held by an entity called Vivian Cole Designs, based in Atlanta, Georgia. "Vivian Cole," I said. The name landed like a clock striking midnight. "You recognize it?" Santos asked. "My granddaughter described a woman with yellow hair who visited the house late at night." Dean called her Viv. Santos and Whitfield exchanged a glance. Vivian Cole Designs received approximately $1.6 million from MZ Capital over 12 months, Whitfield continued. The account is registered to a Vivian Cole, age 32, previously residing in Charleston, currently listed at an address in Midtown Atlanta. The business is registered as an interior design firm, but we have found no clients, no contracts, no invoices, and no tax filings. It is another shell. $1.6 million. Dean had stolen $2.3 million from his own bank and funneled the majority to a woman he was hiding from his wife. A woman Ruth had called dangerous. A woman whose contact sat in Dean's burner phone under the letter V. "There is a connection to the murder," Santos said carefully. "On Dean's personal laptop, the one recovered from the master bedroom, we found a draft email dated 3 days before Ruth's last Saturday call. It was addressed to Vivian Cole. Never sent. It read, 'She found the statements. She is going to report it Monday. We need to handle this before the weekend.'" End quote. End of Groner. End 5. 260. 260. End A. Handle this. 2 words that meant everything. Ruth discovered the embezzlement. I said, "We believe so." Her browser history on a shared tablet shows she accessed the First Heritage online portal multiple times in the week before she disappeared. She viewed the MZ Capital account, the transfer records, and the Vivian Cole Designs wire confirmations. She saw everything. I sat back in my chair. The conference room was silent, except for the low electrical hum of the projector. I thought about Ruth 3 months before that Saturday, packing the emergency closet with crackers and water bottles and a pocket watch. She had found the money trail. She had understood exactly what Dean was capable of. And instead of running, she had stayed to build Ellie a survival plan. My daughter had been a librarian. She cataloged information for a living. She had cataloged her own murder before it happened, leaving breadcrumbs in a 9-year-old's memory. Check the laptop. Remember the numbers. Wait for Grandpa. The Atlanta number on the burner phone, I said. It belongs to Vivian Cole? No, Santos replied. That number is registered to a man named Victor Haynes. He is a private investigator based in Atlanta. We believe Dean hired him to monitor Ruth's movements in the weeks before her death. We are bringing Haynes in for questioning tomorrow. Another gear. Another layer. Dean had not simply lost his temper on a Saturday night. He had planned it. He had moved money, hired surveillance, drafted instructions to his accomplice, and chosen the moment. The clock had not stopped by accident. It had been stopped deliberately, by someone who knew exactly which spring to break. Santos placed a clear evidence bag on the table. Inside was the opal earring, tiny, iridescent, catching the conference room light like a small trapped universe. DNA results confirmed this morning, she said. The blood on the hallway wall and the kitchen floor belongs to Ruth Calloway Prescott. I looked at the earring. I remembered buying the pair at a small jewelry shop on Broughton Street. The October Ruth turned 30. She had held them up to the window and said, "They look like little worlds, Daddy. Little worlds." And Dean had shattered hers for $1.6 million and a woman with yellow hair. What happens next? I asked. We find your daughter's body, Santos said. And we find Vivian Cole. They found Vivian Cole on a Friday, 18 days after Ruth's last Saturday call. She was not hiding. She was sitting in a rooftop bar in Midtown Atlanta, drinking white wine and watching the sunset as if the world had not changed at all. Detective Santos told me that when the Atlanta PD officers approached her table, Vivian looked up, took one more sip, and said, "I assume this is about Dean." She did not ask about Ruth. She did not ask about Ellie. She asked for a lawyer. Santos relayed this to me over the phone while I sat on a bench outside MUSC Children's Hospital. Ellie was inside with Margaret Okafor, working through her second session with a child psychologist named Dr. Helen Park. Not Ruth's friend Helen, but a specialist Margaret had recommended. The sessions were slow and careful, like adjusting the balance wheel of a clock that had been violently shaken. Ellie spoke in fragments. She drew pictures. In one drawing, she had sketched a house with a black door and a woman standing outside with bright yellow hair. The woman had no face. Vivian Cole, age 32, Santos continued. Born in Macon, Georgia. No prior criminal record. She worked as a real estate agent in Charleston for 3 years before moving to Atlanta 8 months ago. That move coincides with the largest transfers from MZ Capital into her account. How did she meet Dean? Through the bank. Vivian applied for a mortgage at First Heritage 2.5 years ago. Dean was her loan officer. The personal relationship began shortly after. We have hotel receipts, restaurant charges, and text messages dating back 22 months. 22 months. Dean had been stealing from his bank and sleeping with Vivian Cole for nearly 2 years while Ruth cooked dinner, read stories to Ellie, and called me every Saturday at 9 in the morning without fail. The parallel lives ran side by side like 2 clock movements, housed in the same case, one visible, one hidden. Did she know about the murder? I asked. She claims she did not. Her attorney issued a statement saying Vivian was unaware of any violence and believed the money Dean sent was from legitimate investment returns. She says she had no knowledge of Ruth's death or Ellie's abandonment. And you believe her? Santos paused. I could hear traffic in the background, the distant sound of a siren. I believe the evidence, she said. And the evidence tells a different story. The draft email on Dean's laptop. She found the statements, "We need to handle this," before the weekend, was addressed to Vivian. Even though it was never sent, we recovered a text message from Vivian to Dean's burner phone, dated the same day, that reads, "Do what you have to do. I will be in Atlanta by Saturday morning." That message was sent 14 hours before Ruth's clock stopped at 11:47. Do what you have to do. 6 words. Casual. Dismissive. As if Ruth's life were a minor inconvenience, a stuck gear that needed to be removed so the rest of the mechanism could run smoothly. We have charged Vivian Cole with accessory to murder before the fact, conspiracy to commit fraud, and money laundering, Santos said. She is being held in Fulton County Jail, pending extradition to South Carolina. Bail has been denied. I closed my eyes. The bench beneath me was warm from the afternoon sun. I could hear birds in the magnolia tree across the parking lot. And somewhere inside the hospital, Ellie was drawing pictures of a woman with no face. 2 worlds again. Light and dark. Sound and silence. There is one more thing, Santos said. Victor Haynes, the private investigator Dean hired, came in for questioning yesterday. He cooperated fully. He confirmed that Dean paid him $9,000 over 6 weeks to follow Ruth and document her daily routine when she left for work, when she picked up Ellie from school, when she was home alone. Haynes provided written reports and photographs. He said he did not know the purpose and assumed it was related to a custody dispute. Did you believe him? His story checks out so far. He has no connection to Vivian Cole, no financial ties to MZ Capital, and his phone records show no contact with anyone other than Dean. We may charge him with aiding and abetting depending on what the DA decides, but for now, he is cooperating, and his testimony strengthens the premeditation case against Dean. Premeditation. Dean had not killed Ruth in a moment of rage. He had mapped her schedule. He had timed the attack. He had chosen a Saturday night because he knew Ellie would be home, and Ruth would be alone with him after the child went to bed. He had planned it the way someone plans the dismantling of a clock piece by piece, spring by spring, until the whole thing goes silent. After the call, I went back inside and found Ellie in the activity room. She was sitting at a small table with colored pencils spread around her like scattered watch parts. Margaret Okafor sat nearby, reading quietly, giving Ellie space without leaving her alone. Ellie looked up. "Grandpa, I drew something for you." She handed me a piece of paper. On it, she had drawn 2 clocks. The first was broken, its hands pointing in different directions, its face cracked down the middle. Above it, she had written in careful letters, "Mama's clock." The second clock was whole. Its hands pointed to 9 o'clock. A small figure stood beside it, a tall man with white hair, holding a tiny girl's hand. Above this one, she had written, "Grandpa's clock." I held the drawing and felt something shift inside my chest. Not breaking, not healing. Something in between, like the moment a pendulum reaches the top of its arc and pauses before swinging back. "It is beautiful, Ellie," I said. "The broken one cannot be fixed," she said. "But the other one still works." I folded the drawing and placed it in my shirt pocket, against my heart, where I could feel its edges like the corners of a truth I was only beginning to understand. My daughter's clock had been stopped by hands that should have protected her, but the clock she had built for Ellie, the emergency kit, the pocket watch, the whispered instructions, that clock was still running, and it would keep running. I would make sure of that. They found Ruth's body on a Thursday, 6 weeks after she disappeared. She was in a rented storage unit on the outskirts of North Charleston, Unit 37B, at a facility called Palmetto Self-Storage on Rivers Avenue. The unit was registered to MZ Capital Partners. Dean had paid 12 months in advance, in cash, the same week he incorporated the shell company. He had planned the grave before he committed the murder. Detective Santos did not tell me the details of Ruth's condition. She said the medical examiner confirmed cause of death as blunt force trauma to the head, consistent with the blood spatter pattern found on the hallway wall. She said Ruth had been wrapped in plastic sheeting and placed inside a large storage container. She said identification was confirmed through dental records and the remaining opal earring, the match to the one we found on the garage floor. I did not go to the storage facility. I did not need to. I had spent 6 weeks knowing this moment was coming. The way you know a clock is winding down, even before the hands begin to slow. When Santos told me, I was sitting in Arthur's workshop, my workshop back in Savannah, surrounded by the clocks I had built and repaired over 50 years. Every one of them was ticking. The room was full of time, measured and faithful. And my daughter was gone. I called Helen Park that evening, Ruth's closest friend. Helen answered on the first ring, as if she had been waiting beside the phone. They found her, I said. Helen did not speak for a long time. I listened to her breathing, uneven and broken, like a clock with a damaged escapement. Then she said, I knew. I think I knew the night I drove past the house and it was dark. I just could not say it. We talked for an hour. Helen told me stories about Ruth I had never heard. How Ruth had organized a secret book drive for underfunded schools in North Charleston. How she had stayed late at the library every Tuesday to help elderly patrons learn to use computers. How she had once driven 45 minutes in a rainstorm to bring soup to a coworker recovering from surgery. My daughter had been a quiet light in the lives of people I would never meet. And now that light was gone, and the people she had helped would wonder why the librarian with the kind voice stopped coming. The funeral was held on a Saturday. I chose Saturday deliberately. It was our day. 9 o'clock in the morning, at a small chapel near Forsyth Park in Savannah, surrounded by live oaks draped in Spanish moss. The pastor read from Ecclesiastes, To everything there is a season, and a time to every purpose, under the heaven. And I thought about how Ruth would have appreciated the poetry of that. Time as purpose, not just measurement. Ellie sat beside me in a navy dress Margaret Okafor had helped her choose. She held the pocket watch in her lap, open, its face catching the morning light through the stained glass windows. She did not cry during the service. She watched the pastor with the same steadiness I had seen in the hospital, the same careful attention she gave to everything now, as if the world had become something that required constant observation to survive. 73 people attended. Library colleagues, neighbors from Charleston, parents from Ellie's school, members of our Savannah community. Helen Park sat in the second row and wept quietly into a handkerchief. Dr. Nguyen came. Margaret Okafor came. Even Detective Santos stood in the back, in a dark suit, her notebook absent for once. I delivered the eulogy. I had written it in the workshop the night before, sitting at my bench with a pen and a legal pad, surrounded by ticking clocks. My daughter Ruth was not a watchmaker, I said. She was a librarian. She believed that stories could save people. She believed that the right book at the right moment could change a life. And she was right. Because she changed mine. She changed Ellie's. She changed the lives of everyone in this room, whether you realized it or not. I paused. The chapel was silent. Ruth also believed in preparation. She cataloged the world around her, the way she cataloged her library carefully, precisely, with attention to detail. And in the last months of her life, when she understood the danger she was in, she used that skill to protect the person she loved most. She built a survival kit for her daughter. She left instructions hidden in a child's memory. She wound a pocket watch and told a 9-year-old girl to count the hours until help arrived. I looked at Ellie. She was looking back at me, the watch steady in her small hands. Watchmakers build clocks that measure time. Ruth built something greater. She built a clock that saved a life. And that clock is still ticking. After the service, as mourners gathered on the chapel lawn beneath the oaks, a woman I did not recognize approached me. She was in her early 60s, silver hair, wearing an expensive black coat despite the warm weather. Her hands were trembling. "Mr. Calloway," she said. "My name is Megan Prescott. I am Dean's mother." I went still. The sounds of the gathering faded. I looked at this woman, this stranger who shared blood with the man who killed my daughter, and I felt nothing. Not anger, not hatred, just the cold, mechanical stillness of a clock between ticks. "I know I have no right to be here," she said, "but I need to tell you something. Something about my son that the police do not know yet." She opened her purse and removed a small USB drive. Her fingers shook as she held it out to me. "Dean came to my house in Macon the night before he ran. He left this in my guest room. I think he forgot it, or perhaps he wanted me to find it. It contains records, financial records, communications, and a video. I have not watched the video. I cannot. But I believe it will matter in court." I looked at the USB drive in her outstretched palm. It was small and silver, no bigger than a watch battery. "Why are you giving this to me and not the police?" I asked. Megan Prescott's eyes filled with tears. "Because I raised him. Because whatever he became, I am part of the reason. And because your granddaughter deserves the truth from someone in my family, even if my son will never give it." I took the drive. It was light and cold in my hand, like a tiny gear removed from a broken mechanism. I did not know yet what it contained, but I knew it was the piece that had been missing, the final component that would complete the picture of what Dean had built and what he had destroyed. "Thank you," I said. Megan Prescott nodded once, turned, and walked away across the lawn, her silver hair catching the morning light. She did not look back. The trial of Dean Prescott began on the second Monday of October, 4 months after Ruth's funeral. Charleston County Courthouse, Courtroom 4B. Judge Raymond Cooper presiding. I had never been inside a courtroom before. It reminded me of the inside of a grandfather clock. Tall, solemn, built with precision, every element positioned for a single purpose. The judge's bench was the dial. The witness stand was the escapement. The jury box held 12 silent gears that would determine whether the whole mechanism moved toward justice or collapsed into failure. Dean sat at the defense table in a charcoal suit, clean-shaven, his hair trimmed short. He looked like the man I had met at Ruth's wedding 15 years ago, composed, presentable, the surface polished to a shine. His attorney, Gerald Fenton, was a tall man from Columbia, with a reputation for defending high-profile financial cases. Fenton sat with his hands folded, his expression neutral, a clock face, showing nothing. The prosecution was led by a woman named Clara Jenkins, assistant district attorney, 41 years old, sharp and methodical. She wore no jewelry except a thin silver watch on her left wrist. I noticed it immediately. It was a Hamilton, manual wind. Vintage. A serious timepiece. On a serious woman. Clara Jenkins opened with the numbers. She stood before the jury and laid out the embezzlement first, because she understood something that most people miss. Motive is the mainspring. Without it, the rest of the mechanism has no power. Over 14 months, she said, the defendant systematically stole $2.3 million from 17 clients at First Heritage Bank. He routed the money through a shell company called MZ Capital Partners and transferred the majority, $1.6 million, to an account controlled by his co-conspirator, Vivian Cole. When his wife, Ruth Calloway Prescott, discovered the theft and indicated she would report it, the defendant made a decision. He decided that his wife's life was worth less than his freedom. Fenton objected twice during the opening statement. Judge Cooper overruled both times. Thomas Whitfield took the stand first. The forensic accountant walked the jury through every transaction, every shell account, every falsified fee. He had prepared visual aids, charts, timelines, account flows, and he presented them with the steady patience of a man who understood that numbers, like clock hands. Do not lie if you read them correctly. The jury leaned forward. One woman in the back row took notes continuously. Detective Santos followed. She described the crime scene in precise, clinical language. The luminol results. The blood spatter analysis. The drag marks. The fresh paint. The stopped clock at 11:47. The opal earring on the garage floor. She described finding Ellie's emergency closet, the crackers, the water bottles, the pocket watch. She described Ruth's browser history, showing she had accessed the MZ Capital records. She described Dean's burner phone, the 3 contacts, and Vivian Cole's text. Do what you have to do. When Santos read that text aloud, something shifted in the courtroom. A woman in the gallery pressed her hand to her mouth. A man in the second row shook his head slowly. The words hung in the air like the last chime of a clock before silence. Fenton's cross-examination was careful. He challenged the timeline, questioned whether the blood evidence had been contaminated, and suggested that Ruth might have left voluntarily before any violence occurred. Santos answered every question with the same measured rhythm she had used from the first night she walked into Ellie's hospital room. She did not waver. She did not guess. When she did not know something, she said so. And that honesty made everything she did know more powerful. On the third day, Clara Jenkins played the video from Megan Prescott's USB drive. I had given the drive to Santos the day after the funeral. The forensic team had authenticated it within a week. The video was 47 seconds long. It had been recorded on Dean's personal phone. Time-stamped 11:19 on the Saturday night, Ruth disappeared 28 minutes before the kitchen clock stopped. The video showed the hallway of 23 Magnolia Lane. Dean's voice, off-camera, speaking to someone on the phone. His words were partially obscured by background noise, but the forensic audio team had cleaned the recording. The jury heard this. She is upstairs with the kid. I told you I would handle it tonight. The storage unit is ready. I will drive down after midnight. Just make sure the Atlanta account is open by Monday. Then the video cut to black. 47 seconds. The courtroom was silent for longer than that. Judge Cooper removed his glasses and cleaned them slowly. Gerald Fenton stared at his legal pad, without writing. Dean Prescott sat motionless, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on a point somewhere beyond the courtroom wall, as if he were looking at a clock that had already stopped. Clara Jenkins let the silence hold. Then she said, "The prosecution calls Megan Prescott." Dean's head turned sharply. For the first time since the trial began, something cracked in his composure. His lips parted. His eyes widened. He looked at his mother walking down the center aisle of the courtroom, the way a man looks at a clock striking an hour he never expected to hear. Megan Prescott was sworn in. She sat in the witness chair with her hands folded in her lap, trembling visibly, but holding herself upright. She did not look at her son. Clara Jenkins approached gently. "Mrs. Prescott, can you tell the court how you came to possess the USB drive entered into evidence as Exhibit 14A? My son arrived at my home in Macon, Georgia, on a Sunday evening, 9 days after his wife's disappearance," Megan said. Her voice was thin but steady. "He stayed one night. He told me Ruth had left him and taken Ellie. He asked to borrow money. I gave him $3,000. He left Monday morning. After he was gone, I found the USB drive on the nightstand in my guest room. Did you view its contents?" "No. I could not bring myself to. But I knew it was important, because Dean never leaves things behind. He is meticulous. If he left it, he either wanted me to find it, or he was too frightened to remember it." "What did you do with the drive?" "I kept it for 3 weeks. I watched the news. I saw the reports about Ruth's disappearance, about the child found in the closet, about the arrest. And I understood that my son had lied to me. He had lied to everyone." Her voice broke. She paused, took a breath, and continued. "I brought the drive to Mr. Calloway at Ruth's funeral because he deserved the truth. and because my granddaughter deserved a chance at justice that my son tried to take from her. Dean leaned toward Fenton and whispered something urgent. Fenton placed a hand on Dean's arm, a restraining gesture. Firm and deliberate, like pressing a crown back into a watch case to prevent the mechanism from flying apart. Megan Prescott finally turned and looked at her son. The courtroom held its breath. "I love you, Dean," she said. "But I cannot protect you from what you have done. No mother should have to choose between her child and the truth. But the truth is the only clock that never stops." On the 5th day of the trial, Clara Jenkins called Ellie to the stand. I had spent the previous night watching her sleep in our hotel room. She lay on her side, the pocket watch on the nightstand beside a glass of water, and a small stuffed owl Margaret Okafor had given her. In sleep, her face softened into something that almost resembled the child she had been before. Almost. But there was a tension in her jaw that had not been there 6 months ago. She was 9 years old, and she carried time differently now, not as a gift, but as a weight. Judge Cooper had approved accommodations. A smaller chair beside the witness box. Margaret Okafor in the front row, within Ellie's line of sight. A child advocate present, and if Ellie needed to stop, she could say the word pause and the court would recess. She did not use the word once. Ellie walked to the stand carrying the pocket watch in her right hand. She placed it on the ledge, open, its face visible. Clara had not asked her to bring it. Ellie had decided on her own. She needed the ticking. It was the sound that had kept her alive in the dark, and it would keep her steady now under these lights. Clara began gently. Name. Age. Favorite subject. Ellie said her name was Eloise Ruth Prescott. She was 9. And her favorite subject was science, because you can test things to see if they are true. Then Clara guided her into the night. Ellie, can you tell the court what happened on the Saturday your mother's phone calls to your grandfather stopped? Ellie looked at the pocket watch. The second hand moved in its tiny circle. Then she looked up. It was nighttime. Mama came to my room and told me to put on my shoes and jacket. She said we were playing the hiding game. She had taught me the rules a long time before. Go to the reading closet. Close the door. Do not open it for anyone except Grandpa. Eat the crackers slowly. Drink from the bathroom. Sink at night. Wind the watch every morning. Count the days. The courtroom went still. 12 jurors, a judge, 2 attorneys, a gallery of 50 people, and not one of them breathed. Did your mother tell you why? She said Daddy was very upset and she needed to talk to him alone. She said if I heard loud sounds, I should put my hands over my ears and count to 100. She said Grandpa would come. She promised. Did you hear loud sounds? Ellie's fingers touched the watch. Not lifting it. Just confirming it was real. Yes. I heard Mama scream. Then a bang. Then Daddy talking on the phone. His voice was calm. He sounded like he sounds when he talks to people at the bank. How long did you wait in the closet? 10 days, 14 hours, and 22 minutes. A juror in the front row closed her eyes. In the gallery, Helen Park wept without sound. During those 10 days, did your father come into the house? Yes. He came back Sunday. I heard him cleaning. He moved things. He turned on water. He opened the garage door. Then he left. He came back 2 more times after that. Once he watched television. I could hear it through the floor. Did he check the closet where you were hiding? No. The word landed like a stone dropped into deep water. He knew I was there, Ellie continued. Mama told him I was at a friend's house. But that was not true. It was part of the game. Mama lied to protect me. But I think Daddy knew. I think he did not care. Gerald Fenton stood, looked at Ellie, looked at the jury, and said, "The defense has no questions for this witness. Your Honor, it was the smartest thing he did in the entire trial, and it changed nothing." Clara Jenkins said, "One final question, Ellie. Is there anything you would like to say to the court?" Ellie looked at the jury. Then she looked at Dean. It was the first time she had looked at her father since entering the courtroom. He sat rigid, his hands flat on the table, his composure rebuilt but brittle, like a clock face glued together after a fall. Mama forgave him for a lot of things, Ellie said. She forgave him when he yelled. She forgave him when he broke the mirror in the hallway. She forgave him when he made her cry at night. She always said people deserve second chances. The pocket watch ticked on the ledge beside her. But I do not forgive him. And I do not think Mama would want me to. I think she would want me to tell the truth. So that is what I am doing. Dean Prescott stood up. Fenton reached for his arm, but was too late. The chair scraped against the floor. Dean's face had broken open. Red. Twisted. Nothing polished left. She is lying, he shouted. She is a child. She does not know what she is saying. That old man put those words in her mouth. Judge Cooper's gavel cracked 3 times. Mr. Prescott, sit down immediately, or you will be removed. Fenton pulled Dean back into his chair. Dean's chest heaved. His hands shook. The courtroom murmured and fell silent as Cooper restored order. Ellie had not flinched. She sat with her hands folded over the pocket watch, looking at her father the way I had seen her study. A broken clock on my workbench, with curiosity, sadness, and the understanding that some things cannot be repaired. Margaret Okafor walked Ellie back to me. She sat beside me, placed the watch in my palm, and leaned her head against my arm. She did not say a word. She did not need to. The mechanism had done its work. Every gear had turned. Every hand had pointed to the truth. And the truth, as Megan Prescott had said the day she handed me that USB drive, was the only clock that never stops. The jury deliberated for 4 hours and 37 minutes. I know because I timed it on Ellie's pocket watch. We waited in a small room down the hall from courtroom 4B. Ellie sat beside me, drawing in a sketchbook Margaret Okafor had brought. She drew clocks, not broken ones this time, but whole ones, clocks with faces and hands and Roman numerals, each one showing a different hour. Margaret sat across from us, reading a paperback novel, glancing up every few minutes to check on Ellie without making it obvious. Helen Park paced by the window. Detective Santos stood outside in the corridor, her phone pressed to her ear, managing something I could not hear. I did not pace. I did not read. I sat with my hands on my knees and listened to the pocket watch tick inside Ellie's sketchbook, where she had placed it between the pages like a bookmark. Every minute felt like a gear turning against resistance, slow and heavy. The mechanism straining toward a conclusion it could not rush. At 2:23 in the afternoon, a court officer opened the door and said, "The jury has reached a verdict." The walk back to courtroom 4B took 90 seconds. I counted. Ellie held my hand, her grip firm and dry, the grip of a child who had already survived something worse than waiting. Margaret walked on her other side. Helen followed. We filed into the gallery and sat in the second row, directly behind the prosecution table where Clara Jenkins was already seated, her silver Hamilton watch catching the overhead light. Dean Prescott was brought in through the side door. He wore the same charcoal suit, but it no longer fit the same way. Something had changed in the 5 days since Ellie's testimony. His shoulders curved inward. His jaw was slack. The polish was gone, replaced by something hollow, like a clock case emptied of its movement. Gerald Fenton walked beside him, one hand on Dean's elbow, guiding him to the defense table with the careful firmness of a man who already knew what was coming. Judge Cooper entered. The courtroom rose and sat. Cooper adjusted his glasses and turned to the jury. Has the jury reached a verdict? The foreperson stood. A man in his 50s, gray-haired, wearing a plain blue tie. He held a folded sheet of paper in both hands. His voice was clear and unhurried. We have, Your Honor. On the charge of murder in the first degree, how does the jury find? Guilty. The word moved through the courtroom like the final strike of a clock tower bell, deep, resonant, absolute. Helen Park pressed both hands to her face. Clara Jenkins closed her eyes for a brief moment. then opened them, and wrote something on her legal pad. Margaret Okafor placed her arm around Ellie's shoulders. Ellie did not react. She sat perfectly still, her eyes on the foreperson, the sketchbook closed in her lap. On the charge of criminal neglect of a minor, how does the jury find? Guilty. On the charge of obstruction of justice? Guilty. On the charge of filing a false police report? Guilty. On the charge of embezzlement and wire fraud? Guilty. 5 counts. 5 strikes. Each one precise, measured, irreversible. The mechanism had completed its cycle. The hands had reached their final position. Dean did not stand. He did not shout. He sat with his head bowed, his hands flat on the table, staring at the wood grain as if searching for something hidden in the pattern. Fenton placed a hand on his shoulder. Dean did not move. Judge Cooper scheduled sentencing for November 15th and ordered Dean remanded to custody without bail pending the hearing. 2 officers approached the defense table. Dean stood slowly, mechanically, and allowed them to lead him toward the side door. As he passed the gallery, he turned his head and looked at Ellie. I do not know what he expected to see. Tears, perhaps. Fear. The face of a child who still loved her father despite everything. But Ellie looked back at him with the same steady gaze she had held on the witness stand, clear, unblinking, free of hatred but also free of mercy. She was not a daughter in that moment. She was a witness. She was the record of what he had done, written in a language he could not erase. Dean looked away first. The officers guided him through the door. It closed behind him, with a sound like a clock case shutting. Outside the courthouse, the October air was cool and sharp. Live oaks lined the street, their leaves beginning to turn. Helen Park hugged me on the courthouse steps and said, "Ruth would be proud of that girl." Then she walked away quickly, her heels clicking on the stone. And I knew she was going somewhere private to cry in the way people do when the relief is so large it feels indistinguishable from grief. Detective Santos found me near the bottom of the steps. She shook my hand firm. Brief. Professional. It was a clean verdict, Mr. Calloway. The sentencing will follow the guidelines. First-degree murder in South Carolina carries a mandatory life sentence. With the additional charges and the embezzlement, he will not see the outside of a prison. And Vivian Cole? Her trial is scheduled for January. The text message, the financial records, and Haynes's testimony form a strong case. I expect a conviction, though her attorney will likely push for a plea. I nodded. Thank you, Detective. For everything. Santos hesitated. For the first time since I had known her, she broke her professional rhythm. She looked at Ellie, who was standing a few feet away watching a squirrel climb one of the oaks, the pocket watch dangling from her hand like a pendulum. She is remarkable, Santos said quietly. I have worked cases for 19 years. I have never seen a witness like her. She is her mother's daughter, I said. Santos nodded once and walked back into the courthouse. I watched her go and thought about how she had been the first honest clock in this entire machinery, steady from the beginning, never fast, never slow, always precisely where she needed to be. I walked to Ellie. She looked up at me. The squirrel had disappeared into the canopy, and the oak leaves rustled in the breeze, like the pages of a book being turned by invisible hands. Is it over, Grandpa? I knelt beside her. My knees ached. 70 years will do that to a man, especially one who has spent the last 5 months learning that the world can disassemble itself faster than any clock he has ever taken apart. The trial is over, I said. The rest is just beginning. She looked at the pocket watch. Its face was scratched now, worn from months of handling, but the second hand still moved in its faithful circle. She held it out to me. Can you fix the scratch? She asked. I can polish it, I said. But the scratch will always be there, underneath. That is how watches work. They carry every moment they have measured, even the difficult ones. Ellie considered this. Then she closed the watch and put it in her jacket pocket. Good, she said. I do not want to forget. We drove back to Savannah the morning after the verdict. The highway stretched south through the low country, past salt marshes and tidal creeks and stands of palmetto trees leaning into the wind. Ellie sat in the passenger seat with the pocket watch in her lap and the sketchbook open to a blank page. She did not draw. She watched the landscape pass and said nothing for the first 40 minutes. I did not push. Silence between two people who love each other is not empty. It is a resting gear, a moment when the mechanism pauses to gather energy before the next rotation. Ellie would speak when the wheel was ready to turn. Near the Edisto River Bridge, she said, "Grandpa, where will I go to school?" It was the most ordinary question in the world, and it nearly broke me. Not because it was sad, but because it was forward. She was not asking about the closet or the courtroom or her father. She was asking about tomorrow. She was asking about a future she had decided to believe in. "There is a school 3 blocks from our house," I said. "Oglethorpe Elementary. It has a science program. I looked into it last week. Do they have a library?" "They do." She nodded and returned to watching the marshes. A great blue heron stood motionless in the shallows, waiting for a fish with the patience of something that understood time differently than humans do. Ellie pointed at it but said nothing. Some things do not need language. They just need to be seen. We arrived home at noon. The house on East Charlton Street looked the same as it always had, a narrow, 2-story Victorian with green shutters and a front porch that creaked in exactly 3 places. I had lived here for 31 years. Ruth had grown up in the upstairs bedroom that now belonged to Ellie. The workshop was in the back. A converted sunroom with wide windows, and a long maple bench where I had spent decades repairing clocks that other people had given up on. I carried Ellie's suitcase upstairs. She stood in the doorway of her new room, Ruth's old room, and looked around. The walls were pale yellow. The bed had a white iron frame. On the nightstand I had placed a small clock I built years ago, a simple pendulum design in a walnut case. It ticked softly, steadily, filling the room with the sound of measured time. "This was Mama's room," Ellie said. "Yes." She walked to the window and looked out at the backyard, where the live oak spread its branches over the workshop roof. Spanish moss hung from the limbs like gray curtains. "She told me about this tree," Ellie said. "She said you used to hang a swing from that branch, and she would swing so high she thought she could see the river." "She could not see the river," I said. "But she believed she could." That was enough. Ellie placed the pocket watch on the nightstand beside the walnut clock. 2 timepieces, side by side. One old, one older. Both still running. The weeks that followed were slow and deliberate. I enrolled Ellie at Oglethorpe Elementary. Her teacher, a young woman named Mrs. Dalton, called me after the first week and said Ellie was quiet but attentive and that she had already read every book in the classroom library. I was not surprised. Ruth had raised a reader the way I had raised a watcher of clocks, by proximity, by example, by love, made visible through daily practice. Margaret Okafor drove down from Charleston once a week to continue Ellie's sessions with a Savannah-based therapist she had recommended, a man named Dr. James Whitmore. The sessions happened on Wednesday afternoons. Ellie did not talk about them in detail, and I did not ask. I knew enough about repair to understand that some work must happen in private, in the quiet space between the craftsman and the mechanism, where no observer can interfere. On a Saturday morning in late November, Ellie came down to the workshop while I was cleaning a 19th century carriage clock a client had brought in. The brass was tarnished. The mainspring was fatigued. One of the pivots had worn through its jewel bearing. It was the kind of repair that required patience measured in hours, not minutes. Ellie sat on the stool beside my bench, the same stool Ruth had sat on 30 years ago. She watched me work without speaking. Then she said, "Can you teach me?" I looked at her. Her eyes were steady. Her hands were still. She was not asking out of boredom or curiosity. She was asking because she needed to understand how broken things are made whole again. "It takes a long time to learn," I said. "I have time," she said. I handed her a loop and a pair of brass tweezers. I showed her how to hold the tweezers at the correct angle, firm enough to grip, gentle enough not to bend. I showed her how to look through the loop at the tiny world inside the clock, where wheels no larger than a fingernail interlocked with pinions thinner than a human hair. The first rule, I said, is that you must listen before you touch. Every clock tells you what is wrong, if you are patient enough to hear it. Ellie leaned in and listened. The carriage clock ticked unevenly, stuttering every fourth beat, a rhythm that told me the escape wheel was misaligned. Ellie heard it too. I could see it in her face, the slight tilt of her head, the narrowing of her eyes, the same expression Ruth used to make when she found a misshelved book and knew exactly where it belonged. "It skips," Ellie said. "Yes. The wheel that controls the beat is slightly off-center. We need to realign it so every tick is equal. Like fixing a heartbeat," she said. I set down my tools and looked at my granddaughter. 9 years old. She had survived 10 days in a dark closet, testified against her own father in a murder trial, and now she was sitting on her mother's stool, holding brass tweezers, comparing a clock's escapement to a human heart. "Exactly like that," I said. We worked together until noon. Ellie did not fix the clock. She was not ready for that. But she held the parts. She studied their shapes. She learned their names: escape wheel, pallet fork, balance spring. And when we stopped for lunch, she placed the tweezers on the bench with the care of someone who understood that tools are not just instruments. They are promises. They say, "I will come back," and continue. That evening I sat on the front porch while Ellie read upstairs. The street was quiet. The oak leaves rustled. From inside the workshop, I could hear the sound of 47 clocks ticking in near unison, a chorus of small mechanical hearts beating behind the walls of my home. Ruth was gone. Dean was in prison. Vivian Cole awaited trial. The world had cracked open and rearranged itself into something I had not expected. But the clocks kept ticking. Ellie kept asking questions. And every Saturday at 9 in the morning, the phone sat silent on the kitchen counter, holding the shape of a ritual that no longer existed but whose echo I could still feel, the way you feel the vibration of a bell long after the sound has faded. Time does not heal. That is a lie people tell because the truth is harder. Time measures. It records. It holds. And if you are patient, if you listen the way a watchmaker listens, it teaches you that loss does not disappear. It becomes part of the mechanism. Another gear, another spring, another tick in the long, faithful count of the hours. 6 months after the verdict, on a Saturday morning in April, Ellie fixed her first clock. It was not the carriage clock. That one still sat on my bench, partially disassembled, waiting for a replacement jewel bearing I had ordered from a supplier in Switzerland. The clock Ellie fixed was simpler. A small mantel clock in a cherry wood case, brought in by a retired schoolteacher named Mrs. Leona Briggs, who lived 4 blocks away. The clock had belonged to her late husband. It had stopped 3 years ago, and she had never found anyone she trusted enough to open it. "My neighbor said you are the best watchmaker in Savannah," Mrs. Briggs told me when she placed it on the counter. Then she looked at Ellie, who was sitting on her stool at the bench, a loop pushed up on her forehead like a tiny crown. "And who is this young lady?" "My granddaughter," I said. "My apprentice," Ellie smiled. It was a real smile, not the careful, measured expression she had worn for the first months after the trial. This one reached her eyes. It changed the geometry of her face, the way sunlight changes the geometry of a room. Same structure, different meaning. After Mrs. Briggs left, Ellie and I examined the clock together. I let her lead. She removed the back panel with a small screwdriver, peered inside with the loop, and studied the movement for a full 3 minutes before speaking. "The mainspring is intact," she said. "The gear train looks clean, but the balance wheel is not moving." "Why?" She leaned closer. Her breath fogged the loop. She adjusted the angle and looked again. "There is a hair caught in the pivot. A tiny one." It is wrapped around the shaft and blocking the rotation. She was right. A single human hair, probably Mrs. Briggs's husband's, left inside the clock years ago during a previous amateur repair, had wound itself around the balance wheel pivot and frozen the entire movement. One hair, one obstruction, 3 years of silence. Can you remove it? I asked. Ellie picked up the brass tweezers. She held them the way I had taught her, firm enough to grip, gentle enough not to bend. She positioned the tips beside the pivot, paused, and then extracted the hair in a single, smooth motion. It came free without resistance, as if it had been waiting for the right hands to find it. The balance wheel began to swing. The tick returned even. Steady. Confident. Ellie set the tweezers down and watched the movement come alive. Wheels turning, the escapement releasing its measured pulses, the entire mechanism resuming the rhythm it had been built to keep. "It works," she whispered. "You fixed it," I said. She looked at me. Her eyes were bright and wet, and I understood that this was not just about a clock. It was about the act of restoring something that had been silenced. It was about proving that patience and precision could bring a stopped thing back to life. It was about a 9-year-old girl who had spent 10 days in the dark, counting hours on a pocket watch, learning that time continues even when the world does not. I placed my hand on her shoulder. "Your mother would be proud of you, Ellie." She nodded. She did not cry. She placed the back panel on the clock, secured the screws, and wound the mainspring with the key. The cherry wood case hummed with the vibration of its own heartbeat. Ellie set the hands to 9 o'clock. 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning. She did not explain why. She did not need to. That afternoon I called Mrs. Briggs and told her the clock was ready. She came within the hour, walking slowly up the porch steps with a cane in one hand and a tin of homemade shortbread in the other. When I placed the clock on the counter and she heard it ticking, she pressed her hand to her chest and closed her eyes. "Oh," she said. "Oh, it sounds just like it used to. My granddaughter repaired it," I said. Mrs. Briggs looked at Ellie. "You did this?" "It was just a hair caught in the pivot," Ellie said. "Sometimes the smallest thing can stop everything." Mrs. Briggs reached across the counter and took Ellie's hand. "Thank you, sweetheart. You have no idea what this means to me. That clock is the last thing my husband wound before he passed. Hearing it again is like hearing his voice." After she left, Ellie and I sat on the front porch. The April air was warm and thick with the scent of jasmine from the neighbor's garden. The live oak in the backyard cast long shadows across the workshop roof. Somewhere inside the house, 47 clocks ticked their faithful chorus, and now, in a home 4 blocks away, a 48th had joined them. Ellie held the pocket watch in her palm. Its crystal was scratched. Its case was worn, but the second hand moved in its perfect circle, steady and sure, the same way it had moved in the darkness of a closet on Magnolia Lane, the same way it had moved on the ledge of a witness stand in courtroom 4B, the same way it would move tomorrow and the day after. And every day Ellie chose to wind it. "Grandpa," she said, "do you think clocks remember?" I thought about the question. I thought about the carriage clock on my bench, the mantel clock, now ticking in Mrs. Briggs's living room, the kitchen clock at 23 Magnolia Lane frozen at 11:47, and the pocket watch in my granddaughter's hand that had counted 10 days of darkness and then counted every day of light that followed. "Clocks do not remember," I said, "but the people who wind them do. That is why we keep winding, not because time needs us, but because we need time to carry what we cannot carry alone." Ellie leaned against me. The pocket watch ticked between us, small and warm and alive. The oak leaves rustled overhead. The jasmine sweetened the air, and for the first time in a very long while, the silence on a Saturday morning did not feel like an absence. It felt like a space that had been cleared for something new, not a replacement for what was lost, but an addition to it. Another gear in the mechanism, another hand on the dial. Ruth was gone. The Saturday calls would never return, but her daughter sat beside me on a porch in Savannah, holding a pocket watch she had carried through the darkest 10 days of her life. And she had just fixed her first clock. She had taken something broken and made it whole again with steady hands and patient ears, and the same quiet courage her mother had shown when she packed a closet with crackers and water and a watch and whispered, "Grandpa will come." I wound my own watch. I set it to 9 o'clock, and I sat with my granddaughter in the warm April light, listening to the sound of time moving forward, one tick at a time, faithful and unhurried, the way it always has and always will. Some clocks stop, some clocks break, but the ones that are loved, the ones that are wound by hands that refuse to give up those clocks, keep running. And ours was running still.